Hello, welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so I thought I'd go through some of the commercial side of the allotment and basically what we've produced this year. Now, I must admit this year's not been a good year at all because of the weather that we had this year, and I'm sure most people have found the same thing. Because of the hot summer that we had, a lot of vegetables won't grow. Things like most certainly lettuce and things like that. If the temperature gets above a certain temperature, like sort of 21, 22 degrees outside, things like lettuce just won't grow. And the same thing for brassicas as well. They don't do particularly well in the heat, which is why I've not had a very good year for brassicas. Now, I normally do really well out of brassicas, things like kale, broccoli and things like that, and this year it was quite clear, quite early on, that I just wasn't going to do well this year. So unfortunately, brassicas are one thing that I haven't done well on. Now with gardening, this is what makes it really interesting, to be honest with you. With gardening, you can never predict the weather, and certain things sort of perform better in certain weather conditions, and that goes through all sort of vegetables really. Things like onion sets and versus onion seeds, dependent on the weather. If the weather's not too dry and hot, the onion sets do much better. If you've got weather which is sort of dry and hot, seeds tend to do better. So it's a sort of juggling that, really, trying to predict what the weather's going to do, and obviously that's really difficult to do. But all you can do is sort of, as you sort of develop the sort of experience of gardening, if you like, what you do is you kind of edge your bets. So what you have is sort of multiple approaches to different things. And then sometimes what you need to do is plant some vegetables, knowing that the likelihood is you're not going to do particularly well, but that's you take the rough with the smooth. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll quickly explain how we did this year, and to start off, what I'll do is I'll compare it to previous years. So this year, even though there is still some bits and bobs in the allotments, we've still got the parsnips and things like the celeriac and things like that, which I've not harvested yet. They're not included on here and probably will be, but that's not going to make that much difference. So this year is actually, I've been recording the produce off this allotment for the last 4 years, and this is most certainly the worst year, if you like. Now what I do is I calculate what it would cost me to go to a shop and buy the equivalent vegetables, and basically I add all that up, and basically what I get is this year that would have been £1,300 ballpark figure. Last year I produced around £1,400 worth of vegetables. That was in 2017. In 2016 I produced £2,000 worth of vegetables, and then in 2015 I produced ballpark figure £1,700 worth of vegetables. So as you can see, this year that's just gone, 2018, most certainly has been it has been a bad year. It's not been a complete disaster. There are things that have done well. There are things that have done not so well. But I would say the majority of things that I grow in this allotment haven't done that well. Having said that, I do know other people who have got allotments and they grow different vegetables to me. They said they've had a really good year. So what I'll do is I'll just go through and just explain what we produced, and then I'll sort of explain what I spent and then how I work out what I did. So in the allotment I've had kale. Kale's a brassica. It's done really bad this year. That was for two reasons. One, the weather, and secondly, I wasn't growing the usual variety of kale that I typically do. Now, Richard Sydenham was very kind and sent me some seeds around 4 or 5 years ago. And that's the kale that grows to kind of 6 foot high. That always does really well in my ground. Unfortunately, this year I didn't have those seeds. I've saved some more seeds off the ones I grew last year, so next year I'm set, and I'll be away. But this year I grew a smaller variety, which really didn't do well at all. But basically, I've had 2 kilos of kale this year. Compared to previous years, I would have had sort of 15-20 kilos of kale. This year only 2. So the kale's done badly. The broccoli has also done really badly. The broccoli, the first, I did 2 batches. I was planning to do 3. I gave up on the third because of the way the second was growing. The broccoli just didn't do well at all. It didn't form the heads properly, so they were quite small. So I only ended up with about half a kilo of broccoli after all the work that you go to put it in. It probably wasn't worth doing at all. So rather than sort of talking through each one of these, I'll just sort of go through and explain what I did. So kale I had basically 2 kilos. Broccoli I had half a kilo. The flower sprouts I didn't bother with this year. Cauliflowers were a complete disaster. I've basically harvested nothing. The Swedes, again, they didn't germinate correctly. The beetroot has done incredibly well. I've actually managed to get 46 beetroot out of the allotment, and there's still some more in there, so there is a few more to add on there, but that's about half of them. I've had 46, and I must have had around 100 beetroots come through, which is, they've done really well this year. Onions, an absolutely catastrophic failure this year. The seeded onions grew well. The sets didn't do well at all, but the onions that I did pick and bring up to the shed to dry out, the majority of them have had this white rot on the roots, and it's basically sent the onions basically rotten. So out of over 400 onions that I put in, I actually managed to harvest 46 onions, which is terrible. Potatoes have not done too badly. They're nice potatoes, but they're really small because of the sheer lack of water. So I've actually managed to harvest 96 kilos, which effectively is 3 sacks of potatoes. I normally have at least twice that, if not more. I normally have sort of 6, 7, 8 sacks of potatoes, so I've only harvested 3 sacks of potatoes this year. Masher was still in the ground. Alocco I didn't bother with. The asparagus didn't do too badly. I've had 1 kilo of asparagus in the spring. Runner beans again didn't do very well. They did come to fruition quite late in the season because of the weather, even though they were being watered. But I only ended up with 18 kilos of runner beans. Last year I had well over 50 kilos of those. Climbing beans, ironically, did incredibly well this year. Now, considering that they're almost the same as the climbing beans and the runner beans are almost the same as each other, the climbing beans did really well, and the runner beans didn't do that well at all. But the climbing beans, I ended up with 56 kilos of those. Parsnips are still in the ground. I've not counted for those. The turnips I've had 18 so far. I think that's probably all of those. The pumpkins obviously did really well. They were nice big ones, and they're in here as well. Butternut squashes, I had 14 of those. Courgettes, I had 16 of those out of 2 plants, which is pretty good. The spinach has done well, even though it kept running to seed. But I've ended up with 19 kilos of spinach in the kitchen. Cucumbers I ended up with 19, even though they sort of went, they had too much sun and heat in the middle of the year, which knocked them back a bit. But the cucumbers didn't do too badly. The tomatoes, we've had a bumper year for tomatoes. We've ended up with 64 kilos of tomatoes produced in this greenhouse, which is absolutely remarkable. Chilies, we ended up with 93 chilies off the plants, all of which have been harvested now. The herbs, obviously we've had herbs all year round, but I don't typically account for those. The rhubarb, we ended up with 28 kilos that were harvested. Strawberries, not a good year for strawberries because it was so dry, but we had 7 kilos of strawberries picked. Raspberries, we had 5.2 kilos of raspberries picked. Jostaberries were 2 kilos. Grapes, we had 4.2 kilos produced in this greenhouse on the vines. Peppers, which is as in the sweet peppers, we had 48 peppers. And then we had celery, we had 24, but to be honest with you, the celery's not good this year at all. It's really tough and sinewy, and even though it's grown well, it doesn't eat well at all. So the celery I've kind of given up with, to be honest with you, and the celeriac is yet to be picked, but I haven't put that in. So that's basically what we produced this year. There are other little bits and bobs here and there, but that's effectively the cash crops, if you like. So in total, produce was, as I say, 1,344. Now that's basically accounting for, if I'd have bought that in the shop, what I would have spent on that. And then I've actually spent £87 on the allotment this year. That was £55 for the ground rent. And then I bought the water trays for the other greenhouse to sit the pepper plants in, which were £32, and that's the total expenditure for this year. Because all of the compost and that I used was actually bought last year. So in total, what that actually means is the sort of profit, if you like, was £1,257 effectively profit. So in the grand scheme of things, we didn't do too badly, but as I say, many things in the many things in the allotment have not done too well this year. There are other things I could have included, things like the broad beans and the spring onions and the other bits and bobs, the apples and the cherries and stuff, which I haven't really included in there because it wasn't really worth it. But that gives you an idea of sort of what I've actually produced on the allotment this year. Now, one question that I was asked earlier in the year, also at the back end last year, was how much time do I spend on the allotment? I've got to be honest with you, this year I've not spent as much time as I normally do because of one thing and another. But I just want to explain, what I've done here is I don't include time when I'm picking things. So if I just come up here for 10 minutes to to pick a few vegetables or some fruit or whatever, I don't really include that. So what I'm including here is time that's spent either watering or sort of maintaining it. So setting seeds, putting out plants, digging the ground, digging up vegetables, if that takes a reasonable amount of time. But if I'm just coming up here just to pick a few things for 10 minutes, I don't bother including that. So January of this year was 0. I spent no time up here at all. February again was 0. I spent no time up here at all. There were things going on, but obviously I didn't spend much time up here at all. So basically, I'm saying January and February I spent no time up here at all. In April I spent 7 hours in total. Sorry, in March I spent 7 hours in total. In April there was 19 hours spent up here. In May 31 hours spent up here. In June I spent 33 hours up here. In July I spent 34 hours up here. In August 30 hours up here. September 17, October 18, November 4, and this month I've spent no time up here at all in December. Now, what that kind of represents, obviously, if you say you spent 30 hours up here in a month, you're talking about an hour a day, I guess, to average out. So at the weekend I typically spend 3 or 4 hours up here on a Saturday, doing the various jobs and that, and then in the week I'll come up and I'll spend, if I'm watering, I'll come up and spend half an hour to an hour watering and doing bits and bobs. So that's what I've included. So as you can see, I don't spend that much time up here, doing actual gardening. What I don't include, as I say, is things like making these films or picking things for the, just coming up here for 10 minutes to pick something to eat. I don't bother including that, but that gives you an idea of the time I've spent up here in this year. So I hope that gives you a bit better insight of what it's all worth and what I put into it. Okay, so typically every month or a couple of times a month, if depends on how many there are. What I typically do is any comments that come through on the channel. What I do is I'll do a quick sort of section where I'm answering those questions to people if they need explaining. I do respond to them on the YouTube channel anyway, but I'll try to just sort of discuss them through so everybody else can see them as well. I've not done this for a few months, so there's a few here. So what I've done is I've picked out the comments that really need explaining, that I've put on the channel, and just to explain to people, you know, various bits and bobs. But the one thing I would like to say is thank you to everybody who leaves comments on the channel. I really do appreciate your feedback, not only on the videos, but if any issues that you've got yourself, which I can potentially help with. So thank you to everybody this year who's put a comment on the channel. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll just go through the ones there. Some of these go back into I think basically July. I think some of these comments go back to. So apologies for not getting back to you. As I said, I did put a comment on the channel directly, but these are some of the comments. So the first one comes from Phil Williamson, and he's saying onion sets and versus seeds, and what my thoughts are on that. To be honest with you, I've always grown onions from sets, and I think, you know, there are multiple different types of sets you can get. You can get sets that are heat treated, or you know all different you know, sort of quality of sets, if you like. I've pretty much had them all, and I don't find that there's that much difference between them, to be honest with you. Sets are all alliums or onions are biennial. So what they'll do is the first year they'll from a seed they'll grow into a bulb, and then the second year they'll grow into a larger bulb, and then they'll send up some kind of seed pod on the end. Obviously for onions you don't want them to do that. What you want is a nice big bulb without any onion seed pod on the top, if you like. The thing is with sets is they are incredibly prone to developing this sort of seed pod on the top, but it's effectively their second year. So that's the one biggest problem that you have with sets. The other problems that you can have with sets is the you know, you can bring disease in with them. I'm not saying that you do, but that's one potential issue that you have with sets. With seeds, obviously they're quite sterile, and you're unlikely to have any problems with those. The problems with sets running to seed is there's multiple things that can cause them to do that. Either the set itself is too big, so when you go out and buy your sets, what you don't want to do is buy large sets. You want them to be reasonably small, so the size of your little finger. That's the ideal size set. The smaller they are, the less likely they are to run to seed in the year that you're growing them. Secondly, hot weather can cause them to run to seed. Obviously the third one is a lack of water, dry conditions can also cause them to run to seed, and you know, and stand up the shoot. So you know, those are the three things that you really need to look you need to look out for. But I would say this year and last year I grew onions from sets and from seeds, and I would say from now on I'm going to most certainly grow the majority of my onions from seed, because they seem to grow that much quicker and better, and they're obviously less prone to run to seed. Having said that, 2 or 3 this year that I grew from seed did run to seed, so which is unusual. But I think this year we've had some quite extreme weather conditions for the UK. But moving forward, I think sets are the more reliable way of growing onions, and they're most certainly the cheapest way of growing them, because a packet of seeds is cheaper than a bag of sets, to be honest with you. So moving forward, I'll grow more onions from seeds than sets, but I will still grow some sets. You know, just to edge my bets basically. But I think the majority from now on will be grown from seed. Okay, the next comment was from Sandy Moth, and they said the grapes in the greenhouse. How are you going to eat them all? You know, so how are you going to store them? Well, if I'm being brutally honest with you, in our house you don't need to worry about grapes being eaten, because I've got you know, there's 5 of us in the house and we all eat grapes. And so I typically pick the grapes off the top here, and they're eaten within hours of them getting into the house, so it's not really a problem. But I'll say, you know, if you're not going to eat as many grapes as we do, you know, there's not. I'm not aware of many ways that you can store them, except for either juicing them, or obviously making wine out of them, which is the obvious one. But yeah, you know, you obviously can juice them and then put that in the fridge and sort of, you know, drink that as a drink, you know, grape juice. But to be honest with you, you know, after you've picked them out of the greenhouse, they will store in the house. You know, just put them in the fridge and they will store in the fridge for you know, a good few days, a week or so. So it's not too bad. But that's basically, they get eaten quicker than we can store them basically. Okay, next one comes from Northern Star, and that comment was really useful actually, saying leave chilies on the plant after they become ripe, because after they become ripe they develop the heat. So what I did, you know, I do this anyway, but I find if you leave the jalapenos on the plant, wait till they go red, and then leave them another week or so on the plant, they develop a much hotter flavour to them. The one thing I've never really understood is a lot of jalapenos that you buy in the supermarkets are green and they're still hot. I don't quite understand how they do that. To be honest, it must be the variety. But yeah, what I've done with the peppers, I left them on there for a few weeks after they turned red, and then obviously, you know, they get the fuller flavour and the heat from there as well. So that's a good tip. Next one comes from Mags H, and she was saying that she's had a few mixed results with her onions this year as well. And she was saying that her onions, she's grown Bedfordshire Champion and also Alison Craig from seed, and it's given her some really good results. So that was a good tip. So I'll almost certainly try those next year. Thank you for that, Mags. Next one comes from Tony Ferrari, talking about growing pumpkins for the first time, and he says, what sort of tips have you got? I always grow. There are lots of different varieties of pumpkins out there. It depends what you want pumpkins for. If you want to eat pumpkins, then I'd go for some of the smaller pumpkin varieties. If you want them for carving, I would most certainly go for a giant variety. I always go for, it's called Giant, it's made by Sutton Seeds, and it's got a picture on the front of basically a giant pumpkin. I can't remember it's called Giant something, the pumpkin. What you need with pumpkins, the best way to make them grow is the ground has got to be right. Pumpkins are fast growing, hungry plants. So dig a hole about 18 inches deep. Put yourself lots of fertiliser in there. Manure is good. Any manure or compost or anything like that. Make the ground as rich as you can possibly get it, and put lots of carbon matter in there, because from a water point of view, they like lots of water. So dig a hole sort of, I don't know, 3 foot across, 18 inches down if you're just going to put one in, and then fill that with lots of good compost, manure, get the ground as rich as you possibly can do, and then plant your pumpkin in the middle of that. Try and plant it on a bit of a mound. The reason being is what you don't want to do is plant it in a bowl, because it can rot off where the stalk comes out of the ground. So plant it in. Now pumpkins need a lot of room, so you will get runners coming out that might be, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 foot long, and then you'll get a pumpkin on that runner. So give yourself plenty of room so that it can grow out. What you might need to do is guide it up one way, so as soon as the runner comes out, you can put some sticks in the ground and guide it the way you want it to go. And then along that runner you potentially have 3 or 4 pumpkin growing. What I suggest you do is wait till they're the size of about a tennis ball, and as soon as you get to that size, what you need to do is pick the best 1 or 2, and take the rest off the plant. So all of the plant's energy goes into that one pumpkin. If you want multiple pumpkins, then by all means just leave them and let them grow, but they won't grow as large as they will do if you've just got 1 or 2 on there. And then what you need to do is religiously water them as much as you can. You don't want them sitting in water, but you want them to have a good water supply. Don't let them sort of dry out. So to give you an idea, I would put a watering can of this size, that kind of size watering can. I would water them every 2 days and give them probably about half of that for each plant. So give them sort of, I don't know, about half a gallon of water, so 4 pints of water every other day in the hot weather, and then that'll keep the plant sustained. Feed them as much as you can. If you've got any liquid feeds, which is pH neutral, so things like anything like seaweed and stuff like that, water them, because they will water them with fertiliser, because they will react well to that. With anything like that, as they are fast growing, the more you feed them, the more they'll grow. So you will get rewarded for doing it. But basically, it's the same with anything. You only get out what you put into it. So prepare the ground well. I can't stress that enough. Get the ground right. The ground's got to be fertile, loose, so the roots can get through, and plenty of moisture holding material in there. Even if you just dig in like cardboard and paper, if you've got nothing else, that's going to hold the water in there. But you must get some manure and, you know, good quality compost in there. Get the ground all really nice and fertile, and then your pumpkins will grow really well. But picking the variety is important as well. If you want lots of little ones, there's loads of varieties of pumpkins out there. If you want to eat them, then obviously go for the smaller varieties, because you'll get more of them and they'll store better, because you don't want a massive one to eat. You know, you only really want one the size of a football really for eating, you know, or smaller. But if you want them to carve for Halloween, you know, go for the giant varieties. Okay, Richard Cinnamon put a comment on there about the plum and cherry tree that I was talking about in the last episode, cutting back, and he said that cherry trees and plum trees are stone fruit, and the best time to prune them is just after they've flowered. So thank you for the tip, Richard. I've not actually pruned mine yet, but I'll get onto that. And he was saying if you prune them in the winter, they're prone to getting fungus forming on where you cut them, basically on the wound. Linda sent a comment about celeriac, and she was saying that hers has grown quite small this year. I can't honestly remember the variety of celeriac I used. That was another Sutton seed. But again, with celeriac, it's exactly the same as the pumpkins, really. They're not particularly fast growing, but what you need to do is make sure that the ground is right. I find with a lot of vegetables, if you can get the ground right, if you can get it fertile, dig plenty of good compost manure into the ground and get the ground really fertile, you will find that most things will grow well. This year a lot of things have grown smaller than they would do normally, so I wouldn't beat yourself up too much, Linda, if they're small this year, because I think it's been the weather. Because the weather's so hot, certain plants do stall and they don't grow anywhere near as well, particularly with you know, sort of, you know, slow growing vegetables like this. But I would say pick a good variety, and you can typically tell from the picture on the front what kind of size they're going to grow to. Fertile ground, I say you need to water them. Don't let them sort of dry out too much. You know, keep them watered. And then again, things with the temperature. I would say things like that will grow better in a more shaded area where they're not going to get too hot. So if you have got a shaded spot in you know, in your allotment, I would tend to say that they grow better there than they would do in the open, where they're going to get really hot from the sun. Okay, David Williams has sent over a question about the greenhouse and how I constructed the border. So I have responded already, but the border that you're seeing just to your right here, so it's 3 foot wide, it's 10 foot long, and it's 2 foot deep. And I find that I plant 17 tomato plants in there, and that's sort of a row of 6, then a row of 5, then a row of 6 in there, and I find that that's just about the right number. I wouldn't go any more than that. That's about the maximum amount of plants you can get in there. The things that you need to be concerned about is don't plant them too close, because you get the ventilation. So what I typically do, as you'll see on the clips, as soon as you get to a certain height, I typically take the bottom branches off, so you get good air ventilation running through. And during the summer months, I've got this window open here, all the windows open and the door open, so there's always plenty of circulating air, so it doesn't get too much moisture, because you can get obviously fungus and things like blight on the tomato plants. But I would say, you know, planting them around 18 inches apart, and then sort of the next row, you know, you sort of plant a plant halfway between the other 2 plants, if you know what I mean. So you end up with like a you know, sort of interleaving the rows. I've tried to grow tomatoes in a number of ways over the years. I find growing them in bags doesn't work that well because of watering. You need to have a reasonable volume to keep the ground stable, you know, from a moisture point of view. I don't find that they grow particularly well directly in the ground, because most certainly in the early months it's quite cool. And what I do is typically run the Victorian trick, where what I do is I put a layer of grass in the bottom of the border, and then I put onto that manure and soil, and that's over on the top. And as that grass deteriorates, it generates heat. So the 3 things that are important in a greenhouse border is obviously fertile soil, Secondly is, sort of plenty of moisture retaining material. And thirdly, you want to try and keep the border as warm as you can, because plants like tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that do behave well if the ground is warm. And obviously when you're starting them off early, when it might be a bit cooler outside, you want to try and keep it warm in the greenhouse. And by putting grass underneath, it keeps it warm, and then keeping the actual border itself above ground level also gives you that level of protection against any sort of late frosts or coldness outside. So that's the best advice I can give you. But as I say, you need to make them reasonably big. If you make them smaller, the watering doesn't tend to be that stable. So you need something with a reasonable volume on it, so that when you water it, it'll retain the water, and it'll be a lot more stable environment. The bigger it is, the more stable it is. But you most certainly need to raise the borders up off ground level, I would say, and get loads of grass cuttings in the bottom, which are going to deteriorate and give you heat, and then lots of fertile manure and soil on the top, compost, and then you'll have a good base to grow your tomatoes. Because again, tomatoes are really hungry plants and they grow quickly. So the more you can get in there, the better. But as I say, plant your plants about 18 inches apart. No less than that. You can go further apart, obviously, but that's what tends to work for me. Okay, next one. Sherry was talking about peppers, and she was talking about leaves going yellow, and they're starting to stall, and there's not much growth. And I think I fell foul of this as well this year, because I grew lots of peppers for the first time in this greenhouse over here, and I grew them on trays. I think them sitting in water hasn't done them well at all, and I think potentially, I've had a few comments on the channel of various people that's possibly why the cucumbers didn't do well either. So I think it's good that they're on a tray, but I think you need to let the plants dry out between watering. So I'd got them pretty much sitting in water. So I think it's better to let them dry out and get some air to the roots, and then water them again later. But next year, what I plan to do in that greenhouse is actually build some raised borders, and actually grow the pepper plants a bit further down, much like I'm doing in here with the tomato plants. Okay, next one comes from Gort's 742. Weeds grown in the allotments. There's a strange new weed that was grown in the allotments, which I put a comment on, which looks a bit like Aztec broccoli, and they were saying that it's called Atiprex latifolia, or saltbush, another one. Richard Sidman also put a comment on saying that it was called lamb's quarters, and you can actually eat it. And I didn't realise that possibly somebody around here has planted it, and that's where it's come from, because I hadn't seen it before. I just assumed it was a weed. But yeah, apparently it can be eaten like spinach, or it can be eaten as a salad. But I didn't eat any. I should have given the chickens, really. But anyway, the next comment was from April Kerr, I think the surname is, and again she was talking about cucumber leaves turning yellow, and I think there's a number of things that can cause this. I think possibly one was it sitting in water, too much water, shade. Cucumbers like shade. Any plant with big leaves tells you that it's used to growing in shade. So I think you should give cucumbers plenty of shade. It's better to give them too much than not enough, because I think the sun can scorch the leaves, particularly in the year we've just had. I think those leaves getting scorched with the sun, getting too hot, and then obviously the sun directly on it as well. So plenty of shade. One other reason that they can go yellow in the leaves is a lack of magnesium in the soil. So if you give them Epsom salts when you water them, that also has magnesium in there, so that will help them out as well. The other thing I would say as well is, don't be tempted to leave the cucumbers on the plant for too long. Wait till they've got to a reasonable size and then pick them. Don't let them get completely formed on the plant, because because obviously any plant that's growing has basically got one aim in life, and that is to flower, develop a fruit, or whatever, and then bring that to fruition, and then that plant's job is done then, if you like, and it will start to shut down. If you keep picking the if you keep picking the fruit off it, it'll go, oh, I need to grow another one, and it'll keep growing. Whereas if it develops a fruit to the point where it's running to seed, or the seeds are developing in the fruit, then that plant will start to shut down because it thinks its job is finished. Much like the sweet peas, never let a sweet pea plant run to seed because it'll shut down. If you keep picking the flowers, it'll keep producing flowers until one runs to seed, and then it'll start to shut down. So the same thing with most plants. So I think with cucumbers as well, if you leave the cucumbers on there for too long and don't pick them, I think the plant starts to shut down because it thinks it's already produced seeds for next year, and it'll kind of stop. So that could be a reason as well. So that's what I'm thinking potentially you have problems with. And one last comment coming from Small Garden Big Dreams. We're talking about the jam. Now, when I was picking the fruit, all the josperries and stuff, I was digging potatoes up. I've still got a few potatoes in actually, and I've not got round to digging all the potatoes out. But I've not done the jam yet. So what I've done is I've picked all the fruit that I'm going to make the jam out of, and I've bagged it all up and I've frozen it for now. When I get 5 minutes, probably over the Christmas break, I'll get all that fruit out and I'll make a load of jam with that. But I've not done it yet. But when I have, I'll tell you how it come out. But I've got some josperries. I've also got some raspberries to go in there, and I've got some strawberries as well. So I'm going to make potentially a mixture of fruit in the jam. But that's where we are at the minute. So I hope this episode was of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments or questions you got below, and I'll always get back to you. And I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.